Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Preventing Fraud and Scams, Safeguarding Older Adults, presented by Home Instead and hosted by the American Society on Aging. Before we begin, let's go over some important notes. We have made a few updates to how we present continuing education information to stay in step with evolving guidance from regulatory boards. You'll find specific CE types available for each session listed right on that webinar's page. Be sure to review those details carefully. If your accrediting board isn't listed, we recommend checking with them directly to see if one of the available CE types will still be accepted. After today's webinar, you can apply for your certificate by clicking on the tab above the presentation screen. Please be sure to select your certificate type or board. If you don't have a license number, you can simply enter NA. For step-by-step instructions, head to the How to Claim Credit tab. You'll also see periodic engagement checkpoints during the webinar. Make sure your pop-up blocker is turned off so you can respond when prompted. You can find instructions for disabling pop-ups under the Reminders tab. If you run into technical issues, please try refreshing your browser first. If that doesn't work, you can click on the Help tab for support, and we will be sharing a brief trailer to a film today. And after the trailer, if for some reason your slides are not moving forward or you experience any technical issues, please try refreshing your browser, and that should bring you right back to where we are. You can download today's presentation slides from the Materials tab, and a recording will be available in your classroom within 48 hours. And finally, we'd love to hear from you. Use the Q&A tab to submit your questions. We'll get to as many as we can at the end of today's session. And now we are honored to be joined by Dr. Lakeland Eichenberger, a gerontologist and caregiving advocate with Home Instead, the world's largest provider of home care. Dr. Eichenberger began her career working one-on-one with older adults and has since become a national and international voice on aging and caregiving. At Home Instead, an honor company, she works to educate families, professionals, and communities about the unique challenges older adults face and the resources available to them. She holds a doctorate in gerontology from the University of Nebraska and serves as a trusted resource for national media on issues affecting older adults. Today, she's here to help us better understand the risks of fraud and scams and how we can empower older adults to stay safe both financially and emotionally. We're so glad to have her here with us today. Welcome, Dr. Eichenberger.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is a topic that I think touches more people than we would like. And I think everyone on this call probably has a personal story that they could share about someone that they know, a client that they've worked with that have been impacted by fraud, scams. And so it's really important that we all become educated on what kind of the current trends are in this area, how to safeguard ourselves and the ones that we love or the ones that we work with. Education and knowledge is power. We all know that. And so hopefully today we'll share some information and resources that you can not only, take in for yourself, but also pass along to any older adults, family caregivers that you work with. And hopefully we can help avoid becoming some of the statistics that we're about to share in today's presentation. So real quickly, I will be joined by a guest speaker later on, Gwen Gordon. I'm very excited for her to be joining us today. We connected through some family friends who educated me on her family's experience, and she is now taking some really unique advocacy approaches, and she'll be sharing that with you in a few slides. So we'll welcome her in just a bit. So for today's presentation, here are our objectives. We're going to talk about the scope of the problem, both the financial and emotional impact. And I think, the financial impact gets covered a lot, but the emotional doesn't always get brought to the forefront. So we are going to dive into that. We're also going to talk about this kind of the psychology behind scams, how they target and deceive their victims. We'll talk about the most common scams that are impacting older adults, and then talk about the signs that maybe someone has been victimized and steps on what to do next. And then also, as we talked about, education for individuals so we can hopefully help reduce the future risk of exposure to scams. So I do like to ground us in some statistics because I think they're pretty sobering. Again, I know that everyone joining here today probably has a story they've been impacted. I know my family has. I might share a little bit more about that in just a bit. But we know from some data, this particular poll was the National Poll on Healthy Aging done back in 2023, surveying adults 50 to 80. The majority of people, 75%, have experienced a scam attempt via phone, text, email, mail, or online within the past 2 years. And I think it's so interesting. We're seeing different avenues that people are trying to scam individuals. I mean, I don't know about you, but my text messages have been, an area of target lately. Click this link to your UPS shipment, or, things of that nature, and they can be very deceiving. And then on that same poll, 30% reported experiencing the fraud. And then I think what's really interesting is of those that have experienced it, 75% said the experience impacted their financial, physical, or mental well-being. And so we know that these scams, while they are detrimental to the person's financial health and well-being, it's also impacting their physical, mental, and emotional well-being. And so it's really important that we're talking about that today. And so the real costs really, they're not just taking a person's money, their finances, they're also impacting the person's peace of mind. And if we kind of dive deeper into this, scams are low risk for the criminals, but really high risk for their victims. Often financial scams go unreported, and they're difficult sometimes to prosecute, which really makes them attractive to the scammers themselves. Sometimes victims are hesitant to report for a variety of reasons, which we're going to continue talking about in our presentation today. And we know that these scams can have devastating consequences. A single scam can mean the loss of life savings with little time to recover financially. And this could impact how they're able to age, how they can support themselves, their ability to access long-term care and supports that they might need as their needs evolve. So we know that, scammers continue to persist. These statistics, I think, we will continue to see them. Scammers are becoming more sophisticated because once they're successful, they continue their schemes and they try to repeat them for financial gain, especially if it goes unreported. So that's why it's so important that we encourage older adults and families to report, even if they feel some shame around it or they're embarrassed, because if they report, then hopefully it can help stop the scammer from being able to victimize other individuals. So when it does come to the financial toll, we do know that billions, 3.4 billion to be exact, is lost by older adults. And if you looked from 2022 to 2023, that was an 11% increase. That's a substantial increase in the amount that is lost to these scams. The Internet Crime Complaint Center received over 100,000 complaints from individuals over 65, and of those that reported, they had kind of an average loss of about $100,000, or sorry, 6,000 of them reported losing over $100,000. That's a substantial amount of money. And so when we look at kind of the top types of scams that are reported, investment scams, cryptocurrency scams, which I still don't fully understand cryptocurrency. It's very confusing to me, but we are seeing more scams targeted at older adults in that area. And then also tech support scams. So you can see the numbers, 1.2 billion for investment scams, 1.3 billion for cryptocurrency scams, and 590 million for those tech support scams. So these are not small numbers. These are substantial numbers and impact older adults each and every day. So again, we need to be aware and vigilant of these scams and also recognize not only the financial toll, but the emotional toll that it also can take. Being financially exploited can be deeply traumatic. It can affect a person's emotional and mental well-being. And so we need to also support an older adult from an emotional standpoint if they are impacted by a scam. And so some of the common mental health effects that we see, depression as a result, feelings of sadness, hopelessness, they start to maybe withdraw from social settings or from interactions. And we know that isolation can be a risk factor for being a victim of scams. So that's the last thing we want, is for an older adult to withdraw from their social interactions. We know anxiety can become an impact, persistent worrying, fear, panic, and probably very rightly so. They're worried that they're going to fall victim again to the scam. Those intrusive thoughts, unwanted, distressing memories, having fears, rumination, obsessive thinking, or reliving the event over and over, and nightmares, disruptions to their sleep due to the stress and the fear that they are experiencing related to the scams. And if you look at research, other consequences can include, increased dependence, a decline in their overall well-being, a greater rate of hospitalizations and long-term care admissions, and poorer physical and mental health. So really the impact goes beyond the financial loss. It really does impact the person from a kind of holistic perspective, and especially from an emotional perspective. But it's those emotions that, unfortunately, these scammers often play off of. So there's some psychology kind of behind the victimization and why these scammers tend to target certain groups, and older adults being a very common target. So the first being, knowledge gaps. Lacking a subject matter knowledge can really increase a person's vulnerability. Like I mentioned, I don't know much about cryptocurrency. So for me, that could be a spot of vulnerability. An older adult that maybe doesn't fully understand technology. When that pop-up comes saying you need to pay tech support to update your computer, even though it's a scam, they might not recognize that. So a lack of knowledge in certain types of things might make a person more vulnerable. And an incremental commitment, saying yes to something once makes it really hard to say no to something later. So often scammers will start out asking for small increments of money and then increase it, because that little yes makes the person feel like, okay, I have to keep saying yes. I've already done this once. And so that's something to be aware of. And then third, sometimes there is a desire to comply. People want to be helpful. They want to be polite. They want to follow the rules, especially if it's a government related scam. No one wants to be in bad standing with the government. So they don't want to get in trouble. And in some cases, they want to help. They don't want to be rude or perceived as rude. And so that desire to comply might be what kind of draws them into the scam. Stress and intimidation is another. Under pressure, our rational thinking can shut down. We know that scammers like to create a sense of urgency so that your rational brain gets turned off. And instead, we need to encourage people to stop in those moments, to evaluate the situation and try to re-engage that rational brain. Because again, that stressful situation, that intimidating situation can make a person be quicker to give that yes. And then finally, shame and silence, embarrassment, I mentioned, often stops a victim from asking for help. Maybe they're less likely to report because they feel embarrassed that they fell for it. I admit recently I fell for a Facebook scam. It wasn't financially related, but somebody hacked into a family member's account and they made it sound super believable. And I needed to give them the code so that they could log back into their Facebook. And I know better. I teach on this subject often. And afterwards, I could not believe myself. I was just, I was a little distraught, even though it was seemed like such a minor scam. And of course, notified my family member right away. I think your Facebook page has been hacked. I'm sorry. I think I contributed to it. But I felt embarrassed because even somebody who uses Facebook a lot, like I do, could easily fall for the scam. And in that situation, it was a sense of urgency. Oh, hurry, send me the code before it expires, that sort of thing. So I even have, let my guard down a little. And so continue to be extra vigilant. So a little bit more on how scammers manipulate. And I think it is important to use words like manipulate and victim and target because it reinforces the fact that it's not the person's fault. Fraudsters, scammers, they really they use these tactics to draw somebody in, and we shouldn't be shaming or blaming the person that fell quote unquote for the scam. And so scammers, they really, again, choose people on purpose to target. And they see older adults as a kind of an appealing target market for a couple of reasons. They're often perceived as being more trusting. They want to be polite and helpful. They might more likely be socially isolated, as I mentioned before. And so when somebody friendly calls or reaches out, they can kind of use that isolation to their benefit. And they often have financial assets or resources. And so they see that, of course, as very appealing. And so when they are trying to persuade, again, they use some of these persuasion tactics, that emotional arousal, that sense of urgency or fear, or that they've won a prize and they have to act quick to redeem it. They really are acting on that strong emotional reaction. Or they use scarcity, create the illusion that time is running out, that limited opportunity. They have to act quickly before they have a chance to really see it through. Sometimes source credibility is used. Scammers pose as someone trustworthy, like an individual or organization, maybe government officials or companies, well-known charities. And they do that to gain the trust. Or they and they make it seem like it is a very legitimate situation. Also, they use social consensus. So sometimes they appeal to social norms or peer pressure, making them think, everyone else is participating. Like all of your neighbors have already signed on for this amazing offer. You should too before it's too late. So those kinds of social consensus tactics can sometimes be used. Also, that norm of reciprocity. The idea is that, if the scammer gives the victim something like a gift or a free trial, they feel more obligated to reciprocate, often by sending money or sharing personal information. So creating that sense of reciprocity can be a way that they manipulate. Also distraction, trying to provide irrelevant details, making it harder for them to process the actual threat, or they ask a series of questions, and before you know it, you're giving them information you wouldn't have really otherwise. Their goal there is to really overwhelm you with information, too much that you can't handle it all at once. So they might call with a long, convoluted story about like a tax issue, while also asking for really sensitive or personal information. So we need to be aware of that. There's also a term, landscaping, and this involves planting information in the victim's environment, like phishing emails or fake social media profiles, to make the person seem more legitimate when they try to connect. They might send a friend request on social media and then start asking for things like money, just to make it appear like there is a personal connection. And then finally, illusions of the truth. Repeating false information makes it seem more credible. They use tactics that are untrue. They provide just enough detail to sound, legitimate. Like, this is the fifth time I'm calling you and your account has been compromised. It's urgent. So they're giving maybe a little bit of the truth to kind of gain your trust before they go in with their particular scam. So again, over time, it's sad but true that scammers are getting more sophisticated and they're using new tools, which we'll talk about, to make themselves seem like someone trustworthy or legitimate. And unfortunately, there are just a number of scams, and this list here on the slide is not exhaustive. And we're going to dive deeper into some of these. But scammers are coming up with new tactics regularly, especially if they found one that works. They'll continue to do that. So we have confidence scams, romance scams, grandparent scams, family member or caregiver financial abuse. That is a type of fraud that we need to be aware of. Government impersonation scams, home repair and tech support scams, charity, lottery, or sweepstake related scams, even TV or radio. And then you have the investment scams, ones that are related to Medicare or health insurance, especially around, open enrollment time. Those cryptocurrency scams, and then so many more. I'm sure, again, everyone could share a personal experience. So I'm now going to invite Gwen Gordon to join us and share her family's experience with one particular type of scam, and then how she is working to share out that information and to advocate and to educate around fraud and scam prevention. So Gwen, I'm going to pass it over to you, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Eichenberger. I really appreciate being able to participate. So I'm a screenwriter, and several years ago, a relative of mine was the victim of a fake kidnapping scam. And it was a rather unusual and sophisticated one because in this case, they researched my relative's family. They researched where she lived, where her child lived. And what they did was she got a phone call from a man who said that he had kidnapped her adult daughter and that she had to give him money. And he was very aggressive. And I think that this is something that people don't necessarily take into account when they think about a scam. And, Dr. Eichenberger, you talked about the shame and the humiliation that comes from feeling like you fell for something. But I don't think that people on the outside of this scam really understand the terror that a fake kidnapping scam can really engender in a victim. His language was really aggressive, and his tone, and she was really afraid for her adult child's life, and that's what motivated her to comply. The other aspect about it, which is somewhat unusual, is they used multiple people and kept her on the phone for nearly 24 hours. So then fatigue starts to play a role as well. And after every time she complied and would make a payment, then they would ask for more. And one of the things too, this was several years ago, and so there's also even a new aspect to this now, which is social media and AI, which are going to make this scam even more effective, because what these scammers do now is they'll go onto social media, they'll find a child, a teenager, or even an adult, and they will use AI to replicate their voice. And the FBI says that within a few months, they'll be able to replicate their likeness as well. So it will just make this so incredibly believable. So I made a fictionalized version and a short version, a 10-minute short, because obviously nobody wants to watch 24 hours of a kidnapping. But even though it's fictionalized, it's based on interviews that I did with my relative and with her daughter. Actually, one more thing about the the psychological aspect that you were talking about, Dr. Eckenberger. When I was interviewing my relative, I could talk to her for a short period of time, and then she had to stop because she was so traumatized. And in the end, I talked to her a couple of times for a short amount of time. And then she said, I can't talk about this anymore. I'm going to start having nightmares again. I can feel it in my body. And so I ended up talking more with her adult child, who luckily she had confided in, and they had talked a lot. So her daughter had a lot of information about it. So that helped me to make this very realistic. And so I'd love you to watch it, and then I'll just say another couple of things.
You're never going to stop, are you? Until I have nothing. Hello?
Anna,
Yes?
I have your daughter.
What?
I have your daughter, bitch. I have your daughter.
Mama! Help me! Help me, Mama, please! Mia, I'm here!
Shut up! You want her back? You go to the bank and make a wire transfer.
Okay, I'll get my keys.
You talk to anyone or text anyone, I will kill her!
Good morning. How can I help you?
Good morning. I'd like to make a wire transfer from my checking account, please.
Of course. I'll need your ATM card and ID.
I did it. I did it. Now let her go. Sir?
What else do you have? One more thing.
I don't have any more! You have everything!
Get out of the car.
Where is she? Where is she?
So the real goal with making this film was to show the fear and the emotion that scammers are able to build up in a person, and because the intention is to show this to seniors so they experience viscerally what someone would be going through. And so then if they get a phone call like that, they'll remember, wait a minute, this is designed to make me feel this way. And the second goal of the film, obviously, is to give them the solution to the problem, to give them a kind of an offense, right? Or that's something that they know that they have in their pocket, that they've already prepared. And so in my family, my daughter's word is the name of her favorite stuffed animal from when she was a child, right? That's something that is not on Instagram. It's nowhere on the internet. No one knows that except our family. And so if I got a phone call like that, I'm sure I would be terrified, but I would remember to say, okay, please ask her what the code word is. And if they don't actually have her, they're just going to hang up because they're not going to waste their time with me, right? They're going to move on. So the short that we have is 10 minutes long. It's what we call the all ages cut, and it's for showing at film festivals to raise awareness in all over the country in places that have film festivals. And then what we're doing now is we're fundraising to do a senior cut, which is a little slower, we've worked a lot on the accessibility of it so that we can show it at senior centers and senior living facilities. And again, really raise awareness and give people a solution to what is a really terrifying and emotionally devastating scam.
Gwen, thank you so much for sharing. And if you download the slide deck, you can click the link to the trailer if you want to watch it again or share it. And I look forward to following your film's progress. And I think it's really neat that you're creating kind of two versions, and one geared more towards the older adult demographic and providing not only an overview of what this type of scam is like and how it feels, but also solutions. That is so key. So thank you so much for sharing such a personal experience that your family has encountered, but using it to educate more people and bring more awareness. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
And Gwen will stick around for Q&A towards the end. So if any questions are directed at her, she will be joining me later. And if you are not seeing the slide advance, the next one should show the title Grandparent Scams. You might just need to refresh your browser. That was a tip that ASA shared at the beginning. And sometimes just that video makes your browser slow down for a second. So if you're having a tech issue, just refresh and hopefully you'll be right back with us. So the fake kidnapping scam is one that we're seeing. It is one form sometimes of grandparent scams, but also as Gwen shared, it was the kidnapping of her adult daughter. So for grandparent scams, and this is one that has happened within my family. It happened to my grandma. Someone called pretending to be my cousin, saying that he ended up in jail. He was on a road trip, and my cousin and my grandma, they don't communicate every day, so he very well could have been on a road trip. And so she got very upset, and luckily my aunt who lives with her was home at the time, and they were able together to say, well, give us a number to call you back at. We need to verify where he's at. And that kind of just shut down the scam in that moment, because clearly he was not kidnapped. But it was very traumatizing to them. And they called the place where he worked, which was a school, and said, is he there? I need to speak with him. I need to just make sure that he's safe and alive. And they were a little suspicious at first when they called, but they confirmed, yes, he is here. He is safe. And so they fortunately were able to avoid becoming victims of that scam. But again, it's important to understand, these calls begin with someone claiming to be a child or grandchild, and they might be whispering or say that they sound different as a way of kind of explaining why they don't sound exactly like your loved one. They'll put some urgency behind it, saying, I need bail money or emergency funds. And they also insist often that don't tell anyone, maybe for legal reasons or for family embarrassment. And in extreme cases, scammers may even show up in person to collect the money. So I think it's important to recognize kind of some of the do's and don'ts of this type of grandparent scam. Don't trust the caller ID. Again, technology is getting more sophisticated. And in my grandparents' case, it did show up on her caller ID as saying it was my cousin's name. So they had done some research similar to Gwen's family situation. Don't share any personal details. Sometimes the scammers will fish for facts like, oh, it's your grandson. And then if you start to spout out your grandchild's names, they'll say, oh, yes, it's Susie. But you actually were the one that provided them with that information. Also, don't let them rush you into decision making. As Gwen talked about, that visceral emotional reaction can shut down that rational part of your brain, but don't rush into a decision. Don't send cash or wire money or gift cards, and try not to panic. I know that's easier said than done, but also the do's side of things, trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Check your social media privacy settings. Sometimes, that's how they find information about your family or your grandkids. So make sure that your profiles are private. Ask personal questions that only you would know about your grandchild. I love how Gwen and her family has that code word. And you can hang up and call that grandchild directly, verify the story. And again, that will kind of shut down that scammer. Or also confirm the story with other family members or friends. My grandma ran and found my aunt. We also have an aunt who has never been married, lives down the street actually from my grandma, and was on the phone. Some sort of scam was taking place, and she ran up the street on her cell phone with the scammer to my grandma's house, and they eventually were able to shut down that scam. So, once those happen, do call law enforcement. And also, if the person is claiming to be a law enforcement officer, ask them for their details. You can always call back your local law enforcement and verify, is this law enforcement personnel a legitimate person? So these scams are common. Another one that is increasingly common, especially as people are looking to continue, relationships into later life or form new romantic connections, are these romance scams. And in 2023, $357 million were lost in these types of scams. What was interesting is the amount was down from the 2021 number, which was 432 million. And I have two trains of thought on that. I'm either thinking, wow, people are getting more sophisticated and spotting these and they're not falling for them, or people are too embarrassed to admit that they have become a victim of these scams and therefore are not reporting them. So I hope it's the good news that people are starting to recognize these scams, because they start in a way where, a scammer creates a fake profile on a dating site or reaches out via social media. They start to build trust and they develop an emotional connection, often chatting with you several times a day. And then they ask, once that trust is established, they might fabricate an urgent story and request money. And what was interesting to me is 60% of these romance scams, the finances are sent via cryptocurrency or bank wires. So that should be a red flag. If you're ever encountering in a romantic situation somebody asking you to wire money or send cryptocurrency, that should be kind of one of those red flags. And so, the common types of lies that these romance scammers are using if you know these, then you can quickly identify that this is suspicious. So many of them claim that they're living or traveling outside of the US. Maybe they're working on an oil rig, or they're in the military, or perhaps they're a doctor with an international organization. And often, once they have established that emotional trust, they ask for things like money for a plane ticket or to cover travel expenses. Maybe they have an urgent surgery or medical expense that has come up. Maybe they have fees through customs that are preventing them from retrieving something, or maybe they need to pay off a gambling debt, or they're going to be in danger, or they want to come visit, but they need money to pay for their visa or other travel documents. So those are some of the common ways that scammers try to convince the victim to send them money. So how do you avoid this? Be suspicious, especially of unsolicited phone calls or text messages. Limit what you share online. Go slowly, ask questions, do your research. Also keep it on the platform. So if you're on a dating app or site and somebody says, well, let's move this conversation to text or to WhatsApp or something of that nature, that might be a red flag. Like, pause, evaluate, because sometimes that can be a sign that maybe they're soon going to ask for some sort of the financial scam tactics that I just mentioned. Also listen to your gut, and don't send any sort of money or cryptocurrency. AARP does a really great podcast about scams, and one that I listened to was about a romance scam. And the gentleman said he was working overseas on a contract agreement, and this woman had such strong feelings for him and kept sending him money. And after she realized it was all, a scam, she was just devastated. So I know there are many stories out there, but it's really important to be vigilant and aware. And it is hard because if you feel like you have an emotional connection with the person, it can really be devastating when you find out that it was all part of a scam. Another type of abuse or fraud or financial exploitation is related to family financial abuse. Over 90% of elder abuse is committed by family members, making it one of the most common forms. Adult children are the most frequent perpetrators, but also can involve grandchildren, nieces, nephews, or other relatives. And it's hard to detect or report because there's not a great central tracking system for these types of elder financial abuse, so it can be kind of difficult to capture the full scope. Of course, families are encouraged to report it to Adult Protective Services, their local police or district attorney's office. But it can kind of be hard to track from kind of one broad central tracking system. And then also the definition of financial abuse can differ, which can complicate efforts to detect and address it, or it can maybe show up in little ways or ways that aren't obvious. And in these family situations, often the victim feels afraid, ashamed, or unaware that they're being exploited, which of course makes them more reluctant to report the abuse, or they might fear retribution from their family members, especially if the family member is their primary caregiver, somebody who helps them daily with maybe their care needs. And they feel like if they report them, then maybe there'll be other retributions, or maybe it will lead to other types of abuse or neglect or something of that nature. And despite the difficulty in measuring the full extent of this type of financial abuse, it is still very much a serious problem and can lead to severe consequences. The financial ruin of an older adult, a loss of being able to be independent because they no longer have the funds to get the support that they need. There's that emotional trauma. And a lot of times, family kind of fraud and abuse, it's less likely to be detected by others. A lot of times it's in hidden or small ways, and it can remain unresolved. But detecting it early and having the right communication or community support systems in place can be really, really helpful for families that are going through this. So, the types of abuse that we kind of see families commonly encountering. Again, these can be subtle or overt, forcing or forging signatures. So illegally signing or coercing an older adult into signing financial documents, misusing joint accounts, that shared bank account maybe for their own personal gain or to cover their own expenses, unauthorized check cashing, taking those checks without the person's consent, manipulating a legal document, or tricking or pressuring an older adult into signing something like a deed or a will, contract, power of attorney, altering the beneficiary designation, persuading the person to change maybe the insurance policy, and exploiting legal authority. So misusing roles like conservatorships or trustees to control or misuse the finances. So if any of this surfaces in your family or the people that you work with, of course, report it to Adult Protective Services, the local police department, the district attorney's office, to make sure that it is being addressed and that is being reported. Another type of fraud and abuse of scams, transitioning back to scams, is government impersonations. And these can be scammers posing as the Social Security Administration, Medicare, the IRS. And they have common tactics of claiming you must pay or provide personal information to avoid things like fines or penalties. They threaten the loss of your benefits if you don't comply, or say that they need your Medicare number for fake medical equipment claim, for example. So always, I encourage older adults or anyone, always verify unexpected calls or messages from quote unquote government agencies by contacting that agency directly through a verified number and confirm that the request is legitimate. So if you get a letter from Social Security, quote unquote, and they're asking to do something and you think, gosh, I don't think this seems legitimate. Look up the number for the Social Security Administration, not the one that's printed on the letter that you got, and call to verify whether or not that is a legitimate request or a letter. And that can go a long way in preventing the scams. Another one, home repair scams. Of course, you want to take steps to protect from these. So, if you are working on a home improvement project or you have a tree limb that fell and you need a tree company to come in, insist on references. Ask for a written bid to get the clear terms and pricing up front. Check with the Better Business Bureau. They're a great resource for ratings and complaints. And then have a written contract, before paying for the work or starting the work that outlines the details. And then verify the completion before the final payment, so you make sure that the work is done. You want to avoid paying in cash or making large deposits up front. You don't want to let the contractor arrange the financing. You don't want to have to pull the permits yourself. So if those kinds of things are happening, those could be red flags. Another tip that I sometimes will share with families, especially if they're concerned about like in-person solicitations for home-related repairs, is just install a Ring doorbell, so that you have video footage of anyone that comes to the home trying to sell a new roof or gutters or those kinds of things. Or perhaps you could answer the door from the Ring doorbell to deter them from trying to convince the person inside to quote unquote go with their company. We talked a little bit already about the tech scams, tech support. They claim that your computer has a problem. They pressure you to act quickly. They ask for payment in gift cards, prepaid cards, money transfers. So I think it's important to realize, legitimate tech companies will not contact you by phone or email or text about a computer issue. And real security warnings don't include, phone numbers to call or ask you to call anyone. So, close any suspicious pop-ups and contact a trusted local technician or your device's, support line if something, happens with your computer. So just continue to stay vigilant, which is this, and to kind of do your fact checking, which is common with a lot of these scams. Another one, lottery sweepstakes and inheritance scams. Again, I think some of the components that make these so successful is, the isolation. Those with cognitive decline might not be able to distinguish something that looks suspicious from something that is not. And then, that financial stability. So here, scammers are really exploiting hope and loneliness. But I think it's important to remember, if an offer sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And so to just be very wary and leery of that. I know Gwen mentioned that, technology advances are making scammers more sophisticated. And what's changed is, scammers can now use AI, artificial intelligence, to create more convincing scams. They're using voice cloning or deep fakes, which are videos that mimic a loved one or mimic even a public figure or authority. And they can customize the message based on your personal data. So it's making it harder to distinguish, okay, is this legit or not legit? And so even tech-savvy older adults can become more vulnerable. And the realism of it all makes it harder to detect. And so it really does, I think all of us need to continue to educate ourselves and be, kind of digitally skeptical, if you will. And if voice messages or video messages kind of seem off, pause, verify. Even if it looks familiar, just take a moment to verify. In a lot of these situations, it's that urgency that causes you to act. And so if you can take away that urgency by pausing and verifying, then hopefully you can protect yourself. So some protection tips, I think we've gone through most of these already. So I'll leave you all to kind of just have this maybe as a checklist or something that you share with those that you work with. But really just, if you think something's off, if something feels not right, pause, never give out your personal information, those kinds of things. Some additional tips here on the next slide, make sure if you are using the internet or technology devices that you keep your text software up to date, that you don't click on any of those suspicious pop-ups. And if you are ever compromised in any sort of scam, you want to contact your bank immediately. If you have any sort of monitoring that you can put on your bank account, like alerts, if there are any suspicious withdrawals, do that. Protect your identity, and of course also contact the authorities. And if you think that someone has been a victim of a scam, or even is a victim of maybe financial abuse, there are some things to look for. There's behavioral and financial clues, and then there's kind of emotional and lifestyle clues that you can look for. So on the behavioral and financial side, if they have frequent visitors from, couriers or delivery services, that might be a little suspicious. If there's an unusual number of kind of these like low value prizes around the home, that could be somebody sending them those little things, asking for maybe a large donation or some sort of monetary compensation in return. If they have regular phone contact with, people in Canada or Jamaica, somewhere that's very unlike them to have a regular phone contact with, that could be a sign that maybe they're communicating with somebody who is not, a known person to them. Sometimes, especially in instances when somebody has cognitive decline, keeping an eye on, the mail. I know I had one client that I worked with who donated to every single nonprofit that sent her a donation request in the mail because she thought it was a bill. And she was giving away so much money. And we had our Care Pro intervene to get her mail and to sort out those. And we still, worked with the family to prioritize which charity she really was passionate about. Many of them were animal related. So, she was still able to give to the ones that were meaningful, but not to every single one that showed up on her doorstep. And keep any receipts of any sort of transfers that you do, and question any sort of foreign transaction. And from an emotional or lifestyle perspective, if there's sudden difficulty covering, their basic expenses, that's definitely a sign that maybe they have sent money. If they're starting to withdraw socially, or they're kind of becoming more isolated, could be the result of that shame or emotional trauma. And then if there's any kind of uncharacteristic secrecy about their finances, that's a sign that maybe we need to start looking into what's really going on. So, of course, reporting the scam is important. I know we've talked about this. There's an elder fraud hotline you can call, contact the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC. There is the Internet Crime Complaint Center, the IC3. There is often state consumer protection offices, but also just reporting the loss of money or property to the local police and contacting your financial institution. Very, very important steps. And when you do go to report, I think it's important to collect as much detail as possible. The names of the person or company or scams, the date and times that you've contacted them, the method of communication, any details that were provided, the payment method that they requested or that you used, and where the funds were sent. So this clear summary of your interactions also can be helpful, because when you do call to report, those are the things that they're going to ask for. So if you kind of go in prepared, that can be very helpful. So finally, I know it was a lot of information. These key takeaways are really, financial scams continue to be on the rise, especially those that are targeting the older population, and they can be very devastating. But it's really important that we continue to educate, provide awareness, help with that early detection, and keep the conversation open, empower older adults with tools to recognize and report the fraud that they're experiencing, encourage family involvement and community vigilance. I know, banks, for example, if they start to notice suspicious behavior, can sometimes reach out to the family or the individual. That kind of community vigilance is important. And reminding, family caregivers, us as professionals, that we do have a role in educating. And in any observations, any red flags that we're seeing, don't ignore them. Lean in and try to do a little detective work to uncover, maybe what is really going on. So I'm going to leave this resource slide up here. I have a podcast called Caregiver Chats, and episode 30, I covered this topic with a gal from a local area agency on aging. Her whole job is dedicated to helping families as they navigate kind of the aftermath of a scam. So that was a really interesting episode if you want to check it out. But all those other resources will hopefully be helpful to you as well. So I know, Victoria, we only have a couple minutes left, but we'll throw it back to you for any maybe common questions that were surfacing during today's presentation.
Yes, thank you so much, Lakeland and Gwen, for that presentation and for sharing your story. We do have a few comments and questions. Maybe we'll have time for two. I'm gonna try. So someone wrote, she's supporting an elder who's still working and still needs to use their phone, but has had some cognitive impairment issues and has repeatedly, kind of like you were saying with, donating to every cause that came in the mail. He promises to stop, but continues to fall victim. What can be done to protect someone like this without taking away their independence? It's such a painful and kind of familiar scenario. What steps can caregivers or professionals take when education alone isn't enough?
That is a really good question. There are, and I don't know the names of these products or apps off the top of my head, but I know that there have been either a cell phone product and or maybe an app. And if anyone knows it, please put it in the chat or the Q&A so we can share it out with the group. But that allow you to enter into the cell phone or into the app your trusted contacts. So it allows phone calls from anyone on your trusted list, which you can input ahead of time. And then anyone outside of that list, it will still capture a voicemail from them and send it to maybe a family member who can then vet those voicemails, and if they are legitimate, forward them on. So you can upload, family members, friends, healthcare providers that are all trusted individuals, and then anything outside of that goes kind of to the voicemail box and then is vetted by families. So I need to find out the name of that. So again, if anyone knows it, or Gwen, if you know about it, we'll have to track down the name of that and include it on the resource slide next time.
Yeah, I don't know the name of that particular product, but it might be time to move from a smartphone to what's called a wise phone, which doesn't have access to the internet. It has approved phone numbers in it, and it has limited access to applications that are useful, like maps and photos and things like that. So there are definitely, and most often wise phones are used for young, kids, young teenagers, but it might be time to start thinking about using them for people who are starting to experience cognitive decline.
Absolutely. I feel like we spoke about AI a little bit, and that's really what people are using to make those like very hyper realistic scenarios. And you have to think about where are they getting these like snippets of somebody's voice to then replicate it. And that could just be like a scammer phone call. It could be videos that are posted on the internet. So when you talked about, just close, trusted family members also on your social media. If you're on Facebook or Instagram or, anything else where you might share family videos, make sure that the people that are seeing those videos that are in your friends group are really people that and that it's private, so that it's not available for other people to use in nefarious ways. And like you said, with the phone calls, I tell my mom all the time, if you don't recognize the number, don't answer it. If it's important, they will leave a voicemail and then we can see what they were calling about. Otherwise, don't answer. Oftentimes I've heard people that, answer the phone because they want to yell at the scammer, or they want to scam the scammer, but they could be recording your voice and using it for something else. So you just have to kind of be mindful of that. And really quick, I know we're at time, but we had a few comments about what can be done after the fact. What can families do when they've gathered documentation but they can't get law enforcement to pursue justice? It really highlights just how powerless families can feel. Are there any practical or legal options available when local authorities don't take elder fraud seriously?
That is really tough. I think, if you're finding that the local avenue is not working, I think that elder fraud hotline, then a more national approach might be the best next step. And you might want to do both. If you haven't experienced it yet, report it at both levels. That way, you're getting at least some guidance and support from, multiple sources. Gwen, would you add anything to that?
I would absolutely agree with that. I think that trying to go up the chain, I think that amazingly, well, most scammers who do, let's say, kidnapping scams do not get caught for various reasons, but they have caught some rings. The FBI is what was able to finally catch a ring that was based out of the country but was operating in California, and they were able to at least shut down the people who were here in the U.S. So that's a huge win. The other thing that I would say is, as much as we try so hard, we want to restore the finances of our relatives, I think I would really encourage people to consider therapy after an event like this, because the emotional and the psychological damage is so real, and it's easy to just focus on the financial aspect, and the likelihood of getting any satisfaction in that regard is so small. I think we have to really think about the psychological aspect as just as important and really pursue healing on that level.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you all for joining us in today's session, Preventing Fraud and Scams, Safeguarding Older Adults. We do hope that the conversation offered you not only key information about today's most common scams, but also a renewed sense of confidence in how to support and protect the older adults in your life and your work. A very special thank you to Dr. Lakeland Eichenberger and Gwen Gordon for sharing their deep expertise and commitment to older adults' well-being. And if you'd like to revisit anything from today, the recording will be available in your ASA classroom within 48 hours. You can also download the slides anytime from your classroom or right now from the materials tab. If you're looking for more opportunities to expand your knowledge, be sure to check out our upcoming webinars. The next webinar with Home Instead is on September 10th on dementia. So be sure to check that out. And also our upcoming On Aging Institute courses. All of that can be found on our website at asaging.org. And if you're not yet an ASA member, now is a great time to join. Trial memberships are starting at just $25 and includes access to exclusive learning, networking, and professional development resources. As always, if you have any questions or feedback, please do not hesitate to reach out to us at institute@asaging.org. Thanks again for being with us today. Stay safe, and we hope to see you again soon. Have a great day, everyone.